Wow. Ooh. Forgiveness. One of the parts of religion which I really appreciated was the fact that it was supposed to be really forgiving. And as a monk, that was an important part of our training, to always give and receive forgiveness. The first story I'm going to tell is of one of the trainee monks in my monastery in Australia. Now, not only do I travel a lot, but I'm also an abbot of a monastery, actually quite a few monasteries. And I've got to train people, monks and nuns. I call my monastery in Perth my monk factory. I produce monks, and then I send them throughout the world, but only when they've been well trained and stamped with quality control. And the same with women as well. We make nuns and send them out to places. But when you train as a monk or train as a nun, there is many rules which you have to keep. You know, we're monastics. There's so many things we can't do. And one of those rules, now as Arunika knows, because she is my host on this trip, is monks of my tradition, we can't eat any solid food after noon until the dawn of the next day. So we fast many hours every day. But just because we only eat in the morning time, it does not mean that you don't put on weight. But for those of you who think that I have put on weight, actually, I am not fat. Actually, the reason why I look a little bit plump is because I have now been a monk 40 years. Actually, that's amazing. It's tomorrow. It's my 40th anniversary since I put on the brown robe. Now, every year, you're a monk. You train in compassion, and your heart gets bigger every year. After 40 years of practicing kindness, my heart is now so big, it's pushing out my tummy. This is not fat. It's a big heart, that's all. So any of you who are a little bit overweight, you can try that excuse. Just big heart. So we don't eat in the afternoon, solar noon until dawn of the next day. And for a person who starts to train in a monastery such as that, it can be a little bit tough around 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock. When you're used to dinner or snacks or supper, it can be tough. So one day, one of the young Australian men who was in training, he had to wear white clothes, for the first year. He came to see me in the morning. He said he hadn't slept all night because he felt so guilty. That afternoon, the afternoon of the day before, when no one was around in the monastery kitchen, he'd snuck in, made himself a sandwich, and ate it. He'd broken the monastery rules. And he felt so guilty, so terribly. Not only could he not sleep all night, but he had to come as soon as possible to confess his sins to me. So I listened attentively. He felt so ashamed. He said, "I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly sorry. I ate a sandwich." And so I said, "Okay, never mind. Thank you for telling me." First of all, I acknowledged and praised his honesty, which is really important. And secondly, I said, "Well, look, eat more at lunchtime, so you don't feel hungry in the afternoon. See if you can keep away from the kitchen in the afternoon so you don't see or smell." When you see things and smell things, you start thinking about it, and that makes you hungry. And anyway, we all have these other little things. You can always have a bit more fruit juice or honey or dark chocolate in the afternoon to fill yourself up if you really need to. So try that. You can go now. And then this young Australian man, he looked at me and said, "What? Aren't you going to punish me?" I said, "No, we don't do punishments in this Buddhist monastery." And he said, "Well, you have to give me some penance, because if you don't punish me, I know my character, I will do the same again." Now, some people are just really hard to train. So he put me on the spot. He demanded a punishment, some penance, to try and make him not do that precept breaking again. So I had to think, what punishment can I give this young man? And as it happened, I was talking earlier that Australia used to be a penal colony. And they used to send some of these people who'd done crimes, and some of them weren't bad crimes, they sent them all the way to Australia. And it was really, really strict, the punishments they would give out. Sometimes brutal floggings, with this whip called the cat of nine tails. Have you heard of those before? The cat of nine tails, brutal floggings. And I'd just been reading a book about that very morning. So because it was fresh in my mind, I told this young man, "Okay, you want a penance, I will give you a traditional Australian punishment. I will give you 50 strokes of the cat." And this poor man, I will never forget this, his face went whiter than the clothes he was wearing. His lips started to quiver. His eyes went wide, and I could read his mind. That's not the sort of punishment I wanted. And it's amazing, these people didn't understand what Buddhism was, so I had to explain in a Buddhist monastery what 50 strokes of the cat mean. I said, "We have 2 cats in this monastery, find one and stroke it 50 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Learn some kindness and compassion, first on a cat, and then you can give it to yourself." He had to learn that the trick of forgiveness is to learn to be kind. So if any of you want a punishment because you feel really guilty for some terrible thing you've done, come up to me and I will give you the number of strokes of your cat, or a dog would do, as your punishment. Because what we're doing here, first of all, when you don't forgive, it means you want to punish yourself or punish somebody. And that whole idea of making a mistake and punishing it is not only against basic Buddhist principles, but is also the cause of much distress and also lying in our modern world. We don't tell the truth because we're afraid of punishment. There was a famous case of a man in the United States who was charged with murder, first-degree murder, and in that state it carried the death penalty if he was found guilty. And during his trial, he started to speak in a way which it looked really like he was lying, not telling the truth. So the judge had to warn him, "Sir, don't you realize the penalties for lying in a court for perjury are very severe?" And the defendant replied, "Yes, Your Honor, I know how severe those penalties are, but they are still much less than the penalty for murder." Of course you would lie, because the benefits of lying exceed the benefit from telling the truth. Unfortunately, when there's more to be gained through lying, we will lie. And so in order to tell the truth, we have to have something which we call amnesty. In other words, as long as you tell the truth, you will be forgiven, so the truth can come up and we can learn from those mistakes which we make and other people make. If there's no forgiveness but punishment, it's opposite. It means that we will always be hiding the truth from one another. In government, in business, in medicine, always hiding the truth because we're afraid of the punishments which will come to us. I first figured this out when there was a young Sri Lankan girl, and she'd been coming to my temple since she was about 2 or 3 years old. You know what happens, you bring your kids along. And that's great to bring your kids to a church or to a temple, and they play around. They don't listen to anything, but nevertheless, they get to feel comfortable. So comfortable that she came to me, she was about 19, and she said, "I'm in big trouble, Ajahn Brahm." I said, "What is it?" She said, "I'm pregnant." "Have you told your mum and dad yet?" "No, they will kill me if they find out." "That's what your job is. Please tell my mum and dad for me." And so it was cute in the sense that she trusted me and that I was going to sort of help her in a difficult situation. So I smoothed things over for her mum and dad, telling them the first precept in Buddhism is not to kill, especially your daughter. But afterwards I really thought, how sad that is. That sometimes when your children get into big trouble, in times when they need their mummy and daddy more than any time else, they're afraid to tell you. They're afraid to be punished and not forgiven. And because of that, your kids, if you have them, will hide the truth from you. Your kid may get into trouble with drugs. They won't tell you because they're afraid. Imagine that you instituted forgiveness in your family. As long as you tell the truth, you'll be forgiven. Because Mummy and Daddy are here for you. We'll all make mistakes. We'll all do wrong things sometimes. Mummy and Daddy are here when you really need us. And I also say that to people who do a marriage service with me. For goodness sake, you commit to a person in life, in marriage. Can't you trust the other person so much that no matter what you do in life, even some of the biggest mistakes, you may just, have a quick affair with somebody. And I know many people go through this. Boys and girls as well. It's not just the men. The women get involved in this as well. It does take two to have an affair. And sometimes they feel, I've done a terrible mistake, but I can't tell my partner. She'll divorce me. She'll go ballistic. What should I do? I thought, that relationship, and what a shame that you can't trust each other and even forgive some of the things which you think is unforgivable. And I've been with couples like that, and I've almost forced them to forgive each other. Because the reason, say, your husband is telling you is because he's not a perfect husband. He's made a big mistake. And sometimes you may not be able to understand that, but he really still loves you. He's made a big mistake. And if you can give him forgiveness, then he can tell you everything. And from there, you can find out what the real problem is. You can solve the problem because he's honest, he's not afraid, brings everything up, and then you can find out how you can solve the problem. The same with anything else in life. In government, corruption, how can we solve those problems if people aren't honest? We don't know what's happened. So with that forgiveness, we get to the truth. And with get to the truth, then we can actually find strategies to learn to make sure we never put ourselves in that situation again, that these terrible, terrible things happen. It's tough to forgive sometimes, but when you see the reason for forgiveness, that is in your interest and everybody else's interest, when you can justify it, then it becomes easy. That's one of the first two steps in forgiveness, to realize the benefits in forgiving. It means one is honest, one learns, and one grows. Over in Australia, we have a special type of football, only in Australia. It's called Australian rules football. And it's called the AFL, not the NFL, the AFL. And I've used that as an acronym. Acknowledge your mistakes, forgive them, and learn from them. And those three have to come together. Acknowledge, first of all, bring it up, what you did wrong. We all make mistakes. I've made many big mistakes in my life as a monk. I remember doing a funeral for a Sri Lankan. It was one of my disciples said, one of his parents had died, and so I had to do the funeral service, for them. And I'm very busy. Sometimes I really should do my research first of all and get the names of who's died. But even if I do get the names, I don't know the difference between a man's name and a woman's name in Sinhalese. So I turned up at the funeral, and you've been to funeral services. They're very formal, and everybody's a little bit sad, and it's very somber. So I went up to welcome all the guests and the mourners, and I said, we've come here today, to do the funeral service, for my disciple's mother who just passed away. She was a very good lady, and before I could go any further, this old lady in the front stood up and said, it's not me who's died, it's my husband, his father. That was such a memorable funeral service. Everybody burst out laughing. I got the wrong person, okay? I wasn't given the right information. And this old lady, I'm still alive. It's my husband, he's passed away, not me. And I loved that. I acknowledged it, I forgave myself, and I learned to make sure I know what gender is the person who's died after that. They acknowledge, forgive, and learn. Now, how much fun that is. And how, if you felt guilty and think, oh God, I'm terribly sorry, I made a mistake, oh, I'm going to go and kill myself. That is not a good way of looking at things. So when I make a mistake, I tell everyone about them. It's great when you don't be afraid of mistakes. Go to the next step. Don't just forgive them. Let everybody know. It makes life so much fun when you tell all the stupid things you've done in your life. Like me, one of the other stupid things I did. I was in Penang just after teaching a meditation retreat. And at the airport, there was another hour and a half before my flight would go. And they gave me one of these delicious milky ice cream coffee concoctions. It was sweet, milky, lots of caffeine, absolutely delicious. But, I had a sort of a straw in the cup, and I was sucking at the straw, and it was obviously blocked because I couldn't get any coffee out. So I sucked even harder. You know what your face goes like when you're sucking. People know exactly what you're doing. Now, people, especially Sri Lankans, Chinese, Thais, you are so respectful of monks. Overly so. Sometimes you treat me better than you treat Queen Elizabeth. Or maybe up there somewhere. And so instead of telling me that I was doing something wrong, they were putting their hands over their mouth so I couldn't see them, giggling and laughing, because they didn't want to embarrass me out of great respect, for the high monk. And I was sucking even harder until I realized it wasn't a straw, it was one of these spoons. I was trying to suck through a plastic spoon. But look, I live in a monastery. I don't go coffee shops. For me, a spoon was a metal thing, with a flat thing on the end. It's incredible what they give you to. I don't know if you've been on Canadian Airways. And, they give you a little plastic thing, and you've got the Canada maple leaf on the top. And the other one is just a stick. I don't know which end you're supposed to hold, which end you're supposed to stir with. I always get it wrong. You make big mistakes all the time. I was in some international airport, and they had all the signs. I don't know if it's in Chinese or Arabic or something. I can't remember where. I had to go to the toilet. So I didn't know what it meant. It didn't have, sort of men and women, or dame and what's the guy in French for gentleman? Homme or something. At least I remember some French. I could find my way in Toronto airport. But in Montreal airport, sorry. In this airport, I didn't know what the signs meant. So I looked at the figures. The stick figures on there, and I looked at my robes, and I went in the wrong place. So if you make a mistake, don't be embarrassed and hide it. Tell everybody. Hasn't that made you happy? So when I see mistakes, not only do you forgive them, you tell everybody about them, you learn from them, and have good fun about the silliness and mistakes we all make as human beings. It's part of being humans, making mistakes. And that adds this beautiful quality and richness to life. So the first part of forgiveness is reading. It has great benefits. To forgive someone, forgive yourself, bring up the truth with no punishments, no retribution, so we can learn. Do you remember the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa? And that's actually a brilliant way of solving a lot of the problems on post-apartheid South Africa. Any person, no matter what they did, even murder, even torture, as long as they told the truth in public, they would be given amnesty. Once they told the truth, they could walk away a free man or free woman. I don't know if you've read some of the transcripts of that Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, but one of the stories which I read, which brought tears to my eyes, was when a white South African special police officer was confessing in public, with the cameras rolling, on how he had tortured and killed a black African member of the ANC. Tortured him and killed him, extrajudicially. In the audience was the man's wife, his widow. Her husband had disappeared in the middle of the night. She had no idea where he went. There were no lawyers, no trials, no way of finding out. And now, for the first time, she was hearing what happened to the man that she chose above all others, the father of her children, the one she still loved, and how brutally he had been tortured and killed. At the end of the testimony, the widow ran towards the defendant. There were police there whose whole job was to protect any payback, any sort of retribution from family members who were hearing just what had happened to them. But this lady was far too quick. She jumped over the barriers, ducked around the police officers, and went right for this white man who had killed and tortured her husband. And the white police officer, according to the transcripts, froze in horror as she put her big black arms around him and said, "I forgive you," and hugged. There was just a beautiful moment where everything stopped. Everyone, black, white, anybody, burst out crying. And they saw the beauty of forgiveness. If a wife who still loved her husband could forgive his torturer and murderer, it gives hope for our world. You don't need retribution. You need forgiveness and learning, so no one is ever in that position again, that they feel forced, compelled to do such horrendous crimes. We all know what happened afterwards. It just gave this breathing space in South Africa for some sort of reconciliation to happen. Some of the afterglow of such inspiring ways of governing have disappeared. But still, it's the way forward, as many people can understand. So if a person can forgive a murderer and torturer, the one you love, how much else can we forgive? Can you forgive your husband if he's had a mistress? Can you forgive your wife if she's overspent the credit card? Or whatever else you do. For goodness sake, people make mistakes. Acknowledge it. Make sure that people you love aren't afraid of you. Your kids know they can tell you anything. And you're not going to scold them as long as they're telling the truth. And then we can learn, we can grow and make things so much better. But when somebody does these small things to us, why is it we can't just forgive and let it go? How we do this, once we realize it can be done, the next step is that this person deserves to be forgiven. Because a lot of times we think, they've done the unforgivable. They have done such a horrendous crime. They don't deserve any leniency, compassion at all. They never gave it to my child when they raped them. I just want to throw them in some jail, throw the key away and let them rot. It's understandable, but it's not wise. Because if that's your heart and mind, that you are going to be in jail with that offender for the rest of your life until you've forgiven. So first of all, you see the benefits. But the second, you see that person is worth forgiving. And the way to do this is one of my most famous stories, which anyone who's ever heard even one or two of my YouTube talks, read even one of my books, would know this is one of my signature stories, the 2 bad bricks in the wall story. And this shows us why we should forgive. That there's no person in this world who does not deserve forgiveness. In brief, 31 years ago, when I went to Australia, sent there by my teacher, shortly after he sent me there, 1 month later, he had a stroke, could not speak, so he couldn't ask me to come back. And I've been stuck there ever since. So, we had no land, we had land with a loan to get the land, no buildings. So I had to learn how to build. And you know, I was a theoretical physicist, an academic, just like many of you here. Academics, for the most part, are hopeless in DIY. So don't even ask your husband to fix anything. But I had to learn. So I learned mixing concrete and actually laying bricks especially. And laying bricks, if you watch a bricklayer, it looks so easy. You try it yourself and it's impossible. You know, the brick is never level. You tap one corner down, another one comes up. And then you tap the other corner down, it goes out of line. You tap it in line, the first corner's high again. It's just frustrating. But after a while, you got the hang of it. And I had time, so I made sure every brick was perfect before I went on to the next one. You know, you're a perfectionist? That's what I was. And when I finished my first brick wall, like most people do, you stand back to admire your handiwork. And it was only then that I saw that 2 of those bricks were at an angle. They were crooked. They weren't level like all the other bricks. They stood out, and it was so bad. Now, I tried to scrape the cement mortar out to reset those bricks, but I could not. It was solid, rock hard. And it's absolutely true. I had another monk with me at the time. So I went up to him and asked, can we afford to buy some dynamite so I can blow up the wall and start again? I wanted to destroy that wall, to start over again. But we couldn't afford it. So I was stuck with that terrible wall for 3 months. And I told people in Toronto, every time I thought of that wall, I felt so guilty, wasting people's donations, making a mess of the first building in our monastery. At night time, this is true also. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with a nightmare, sweating, because I've been dreaming of the big mistake, my 2 bad bricks. Have you ever had those dreams when you go to an exam and you arrive late? You know, when you do things and you have this nightmare you've stuffed up? That was my dream. I made a bad brick wall. The trouble is that was true. It was real. When any visitor came, I would make sure I was the guide and I'd take them around to see my monastery, making sure I always took them somewhere else so they could never see my mistakes. I was so embarrassed and so ashamed and so guilty until I was with a man one day. They saw that wall. They said it was a beautiful wall. I could not believe them. I think I said something, have you left your glasses in the car? Are you visually impaired? Can't you see those two crooked bricks? And that's when they told me, said, yeah, I can see the two bad bricks, but I can also see the 998 perfect bricks as well. And as they say, that hit me like a brick. Because why was it? For 3 months, all I could ever think of was my two mistakes. All I could ever see was the two bad bricks. It was me who was visually impaired. I was blind to all the other bricks, to the left, the right, above and below, my mistakes. And because of that, I wanted to destroy that wall. Now, you've heard that story many times before, I'm sure. But the reason I said it, because this gives you the clue in how to forgive. Your husband has had an affair. How long? How many days has he been faithful to you? Why destroy a marriage on two bad bricks? When you look at all the other good and wonderful things he's done, you see the big picture. Forgiveness becomes possible. He is not a bad, lecherous man. A woman once asked me in Malaysia, at a university, she was a professor too. And I remember this, she put her hand up in question time and said, Ajahn Brahm, this morning I caught my husband out. He was lying to me. Absolutely sure, no doubt about it, he lied. I can't trust him any longer. It really hurt our marriage. Should I divorce him? And before I answered, I got some more information. I said, what are you teaching at this university? She said, math. I said, how long have you been married? She said, about 3 years. I saw my opportunity to teach her why you should forgive. So I said, you do maths. I used to do maths. Let's do some statistics. 3 years, let's call that 1,000 days. And let's assume, it's a reasonable assumption, that every day your husband, on average, has said 20 things to you which could be right, which could be wrong. That's conservative. So since you've been married, your husband has said 20,000 statements to you, and now he's lied for the first time. So, according to probability theory, the next time he opens his mouth, there is a 20,000 to 1 chance he's telling the truth. What do you mean you can't trust him? When I put it that way, it made it very clear. One lie is all we see, so I can't trust you anymore. The 19,999 times he tells the truth, you don't see that. Which is why we don't trust, why we don't forgive, why we end relationships. So, understanding that when somebody has hurt you, they've said or done something which is mean and cruel and they shouldn't have done that, if you want to forgive them, go and think, contemplate, find out of all the times they have done wonderful things, kind things, honest things, generous things. Please put those bad bricks in perspective. And then you find, wow, they're not such a bad person after all. But when you get angry and upset, when you get hurt, you can only see 2 bad bricks, which is why you can't forgive. You can only see faults. So when you realize a person is worthy of forgiveness, and forgiveness is beneficial, the rest is easy. A lot of times we can't forgive. They don't deserve to be forgiven. Or, now what's the point of forgiving? They'll just do the same old thing again. Those are the 2 impediments to forgiveness. So, Now we go on to the big one, forgiving yourself. Why is it it's harder to forgive yourself than it is to forgive others? It's really weird, Western culture, and very weird when Westerners have gone into places like Sri Lanka and Burma and colonized, and we've infected you with our stupid ways of looking at things. Why can't you forgive yourself? I will now tell you why. This is a little story. If you know the answer, I'm going to ask you to be quiet. I told this in Toronto, the first night, University of Toronto. Many people, if they had read this story, they'd forgotten it, and it worked perfectly. It's a riddle. So I'm engaging you now because I'm going to ask you a question at the end of this story. It's a story of the 7 monks meditating in a cave a long time ago. Listen carefully, because the 7 monks were the head monk. The second was his brother, also a monk. The third, the best friend. All these 7 were monks. The third was the best friend. They went to the monastery and ordained together. The 4th monk was his enemy. Now, even though, monks have kindness, still, there's some people you just cannot get on with. They have personality clashes. So the 4th monk we call the enemy. The 5th monk was a very old monk. So old that they expected him to die at any time. He'd lived a long life, was advanced in years, and was about to pass away. The next monk was a very sick monk. And he was just so sickly that no one knew who would die first, the old monk or the sick monk. They were both at the end of their life. And the last monk, number 7, was what we call the useless monk. Every time he did some chanting, always chanted out of tune. When he meditated, fell asleep and started snoring. Could never do anything right. The useless monk. And I've been a monk and visited many monasteries. Every monastery has one. And those were the 7 monks. Now one day, a gang of robbers found the cave in the jungle where these monks were meditating on compassion, loving kindness. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free of pain and illness and suffering. Loving kindness to the whole world, all animals, humans, everybody without exception. And when these robbers found that cave, they realized this would be a wonderful hideout where they could store all their stolen goods until the heat died down, where they could hide from the authorities. But there was a problem. These monks, they knew where this cave was. So they decided to kill all of those monks. But the head monk was a very good talker, like some other head monks you might know. This head monk, he could, as they say, he could sell ice cubes to the Inuit. And he managed to talk the head of this gang of robbers into letting everyone go except one. One would have to be sacrificed, would be killed in front of all the others as a warning that if any one of those monks they set free told the police, these robbers will come after them, find them, and kill them. It was a warning. And that was the best the head monk could do. So the head monk had this terrible, terrible choice. Who to kill, or who to choose, rather, to die so all the rest could be free. Now, I'm going to ask you, if you were that head monk, who would you choose? But before you answer, I'll go through the list again. Number 1, the head monk himself. Number 2, his best friend who would do anything for this monk. Number 3, the brother. And again, they loved each other so much. Again, they would sacrifice for each other. The next monk, number 4, was the enemy, who he didn't really like. The 5th and 6th monk were the old monk and the sick monk, who were at the end of their life anyway. And the last monk was the useless monk, who throughout his whole life had never really done much for anybody. So, if you were the head monk, who would you choose? Any suggestions? If you think himself, put your hand up. Great, you are all wrong. That is the usual answer, which shows why you can't forgive yourself. The answer was, if you read my book, the answer was the head monk couldn't choose. He loved his brother no more, no less than his best friend. And he loved the enemy just as much. He loved the old monk, the sick monk, and the dear old useless monk no more, no less than anybody else. And most importantly, he loved himself no more, no less than all the other monks. If there's any Christians here, there was many Christians last night, one of the golden rules is to love your neighbor as yourself. Not love your neighbor more than yourself, to love your neighbor as yourself, to love yourself as your neighbor. No more, no less. The head monk couldn't choose. And for those of you who ask, well, what happened next? This is actually based, it's not exactly the same, I do exaggerate things, but it's based on the Theravada, some sutras in the Buddhist canon on the tale of Talaputta. What happened was, half of those, they all stopped robbing. They were so inspired and uplifted by this teaching that half the robbers, they gave up the job of robbing, went back to the village and got proper jobs, and the other half became monks. That's supposed to be what happened in a story told by the Buddha. But anyhow, I tell that story because most people who haven't heard it before always say he sacrificed himself, which reveals that you don't love yourself as much as you love other people. You are much harder on yourself, less forgiving. You can forgive others, you find it harder to forgive yourself. That's because you don't love yourself as your neighbor. You love your neighbor more. This is like a Western, mostly, a Western sickness, a wrong way of looking at things. People ask me, oh, well, if you love yourself, don't you get proud and big-headed? The answer is no. You get big-hearted, not big-headed. You love yourself no more, no less. You treat all human beings, including yourself, equally. So if you want to forgive yourself all those terrible things you did, like doing a funeral for one person and saying it was for another who was still alive, doing stupid stuff like sucking through a spoon. If you did that, I'd laugh. And if you sort of, forgot, who I was and thought I was a nun, I would laugh. I wouldn't feel sort of bad about that. That's how I'd treat you. I'd forgive you straight away. When that fellow sort of took a sandwich in the afternoon, I was not going to punish him. Just forgive him. And I forgive myself the same as well. I treat myself no more, no less than anybody else. So if I do something wrong and terrible and bad, make a bad joke, and no one laughs, or get it wrong and offend somebody, that's the trouble with jokes. Sometimes you always offend somebody. You say it wrong and get into big trouble sometimes, but nevertheless, if I do make a mistake, I look at my mistakes as just one or two bad bricks on the wall. And before I even start forgiving myself or thinking, do I deserve forgiveness, I look at all my good qualities, all the beautiful bricks in my wall as a human being. And when I see the full picture, I realize I, Ajahn Brahm, deserve forgiveness. That you, whatever your name is, you deserve forgiveness. You made a big mistake, but what else have you done in your life? I go to prisons. I teach prisoners. I teach them how to forgive what they've done. And I remember there's one guy who's going around our local prison. I don't know if he's released yet. He's about to be released. He keeps going around telling all his friends, it's only 2 bad bricks. It's only 2 bad bricks. He's got it. He's done some terrible crimes, but all the other things he's done in his life, he's now seen all the other good, wonderful things he's done in his life, and now he's put his crimes in perspective. He's forgiven himself. And that means when he goes from jail, he won't reoffend, because he knows he's not a criminal. He's a person who's done a crime, not a criminal. When you make a mistake, if you have committed adultery, had an affair and your wife doesn't know, are you an adulterer? You're not an adulterer. You're a person who's done adultery. If you've lied, are you a liar? You're not. You're a person who's lied. You're much bigger than any mistake you've made in the world. And the thing is, when we don't get perspective, when we just focus on the two mistakes, the bad bricks, which is psychologically, it's a weird thing, but it happens to us all. We make a mistake and that obsesses us. We forget about all the good stuff. When we put it in reality, perspective, we realize we are worthy of forgiveness. We're a good person. All the others are worthy of forgiveness. Don't know what they've done to you, what they've said to you. They're worthy of forgiveness. Some of the enemies you may have, I don't know who your enemy is. There's so many other people love them and think they're wonderful. A person who's cheated you, they have children who think that my daddy is the best. It's weird. How can anyone like, please excuse me, that bastard who did that to me? And when you find out people do love them, why? Because the people who love them and respect them can see all their good qualities. When you've been on the receiving end of hurt, cruelty, cheating, you're blind to their good qualities. So when you see your enemy, the one who cheated you, when you see them through the eyes of people who love them, that changes the whole picture and allows them to be forgiven. And lastly, people say, oh, Ajahn Brahm, you live in the monastery, it's easy to forgive people in the monastery, but in the real world, how can you forgive people in the real world? They'll do the same again. How far can forgiveness go? Can you forgive one of the worst crimes? Paedophile? These beautiful little children. You may be a mother, you may be a father, and the idea that someone can abuse your kid, that just makes your skin creep. And for many people, that's the most unforgivable thing. I've met people who have committed paedophilia in prisons. You've talked to them. You've counseled them. You couldn't imagine the amount of guilt they feel. There are fewer psychopaths, people who are basically crazy. But some others, they're human beings. And if you can see the humanity in them, and if they can see that humanity themselves, they're good bricks, then there's a way out. A way out from that terrible crime. And people can go back into society, never ever doing such a horrendous thing again. You know what happens? Many paedophiles were victims of paedophilia themselves when they were young. They're forgiven and moved on. An example of that is my own father. When I was young, he died when I was 16. I always asked about my paternal father, my grandfather. And my own father would never talk about him. And that always concerned me. This was my grandfather, and I wanted to know about him. It was only maybe the last year of my father's life when I pressed him on, why don't you talk about your father? Maybe he thought I was old enough now, and he actually told me about him. And again, please excuse me, because my father said, your grandfather was a bastard through and through. And that really shocked me. I never heard my father talk like that with anger. So what happened? My father was born in Liverpool during the Great Depression years. His father was a plumber, maybe out of work, maybe in work. If he got any money, he would go down the pub and drink it. like many other people. When he would get home drunk, he would get out his leather belt and beat any kid who he saw, including my father, and then start beating his wife. And that just hurt my father. More than being on the end of the belt himself, was seeing his mother beaten like that. Domestic abuse, physical abuse. But he told me, he said, whenever I was on the end of that belt, being whipped in pain for no reason whatsoever, I decided, I made a resolution, if I survive, if I have children myself, I will never, ever, ever punish them. He never could. Sometimes I deserved it. And he'd get out a slipper, but he just couldn't do it. Because he remembered the time he was on the end of a beating. He just couldn't. He transformed. He should have been a victim of physical abuse and visited it on his own kids. But he learned and never did it again. That's why he was such a wonderful man to me. Because he'd been through it, realized how bad it was, and would never do it again. That is what forgiveness is. It makes our world beautiful. It gives it the opportunity to heal these recurring problems in our world. Punishment doesn't work. Punishment makes you sick. When you anger, revenge, what good does that do? It doesn't stop the problem. It perpetuates it. Acknowledging brings the truth up. We all know what happens and why. Forgiveness, no punishment, allows the truth to surface. And we learn. And from that learning, we find that we never need to misbehave, to hurt other people or hurt ourselves ever again. That's called forgiveness. Thank you. There we go. Questions, comments, and complaints. The 3 C's. Yeah.
Thank you. On your last story, your father learned, but did he forgive his father?
Yeah, it's true. He never forgave his father, but he learned from those mistakes. So he acknowledged it. And eventually, by telling me, right, that was a part of his own forgiveness to his father. Now, how much of these terrible things do we bottle up, we keep inside, we're afraid to tell others? You know, just basic psychology, just as soon as you tell others, it's the start of healing. Bringing it up, telling another person you trust about the terrible, terrible things which have happened to you. That's why he could not tell me for years. When he did, for him, it was the start of his healing.
Hi. Just going back to your story about husband and wife, you say if they're honest to you and let you know they have an affair, you should forgive them. But if a husband or a wife find their partner has an affair, but they never admit it if they're asked, then what do you do?
Well, if they don't tell each other?
If you know, so
if you know someone else?
Yeah.
Okay. Look, some men especially, think they can have an affair and get away with it. Their wife will never find out. Now that is so common with men when they have an affair. And we always tell them these days, that about, was it a year ago, 2 years ago, the head of the CIA was busted for having an affair with one of his secretaries or someone. If the head of the United States spy agency can't keep that secret from his wife, who can? So guys, you have no luck, you have no chance. You're going to get busted for sure. If general betrayers can't hide it, who can? Wives find out. Always. And that's again and again and again and again in life. Why do you think that you're so clever and special that you can hide it? Wives, they've got some psychic powers that they know. The same with guys know as well. So you will never be able to hide it. You will be busted, you'll be found out. So sometimes if you know that someone else is having an affair, usually the wife will find out soon, or the husband will find out, whichever it is. And it's really a great shame that they try and hide it, and they don't tell each other. If they're trying to hide it, you know why? Have you really got a marriage left? But if someone comes and tells you, they got the guts and the courage, say your wife has had an affair, because it's not always the husband. The wife's had an affair, and she says, darling, I've done something really wrong and terrible. You know, I've had an affair with someone. What does that mean? That means she's telling you because she still wants to keep this marriage going. She's made a mistake, and it's a plea for help. Not for scolding, but for help. So please accept it for what it is, and then work it out together. Who was it and why? Is it because I'm spending too much time away from you? Is it because you're overworked? Is it because you're in a situation where people are in an office or something, you're getting too close to people? Can we move you to another office or change your mobile phone number or something? There's so many strategies you can use to end an affair if you want to. And a lot of times, I've found in my work, the husbands and wives, they really do love each other, but they make mistakes. It's almost like they're playing around on the edges of their marriage, and they go too far. They make this huge mistake, and they feel so terrible about it. And when that forgiveness happens, there's one case that always comes to mind. This couple, a Japanese girl married to an Australian man, and he had an affair. She found out, of course, and he was devastated because he really loved her. And he really did, okay? Sometimes you women might find, how can you do that and say you love me? He does. And I really did everything I got to talk them out of getting divorced. And I told her, put your husband on probation for a year. Don't divorce yet. And if he really keeps his promises to you, you can look at his mobile phone, check his messages, SMSs, any time of the day or night, get his computer passwords. You can follow him around or something. He's on probation for 1 year. Give him a chance. He passed the probation with flying colours. And they're together again. And out of gratitude, they come to my monastery every week without fail, to offer lunch. Out of gratitude for saving their marriage. And they would regret that it came so close to breaking up from two people who belonged together because one made a mistake. 2 bad bricks does not mean you should destroy the wall. Front? Okay, front of here.
I find with forgiveness, I'm able to forgive. I think I'm forgiving, but if the person continues with the behavior, or I'll get triggered by something, and then a couple years later, I start myself getting angry again, and this happens over and over and over again. Am I not forgiving right, or?
If it's still leaving a residue there where you keep remembering it time and time again, you're remembering your hurt. It's like the story I say, like someone calls you an idiot. And then afterwards you start thinking, I'm not an idiot. Why did they call me an idiot? It's wrong to call me an idiot. And if you're wise, you realize they've just called you an idiot 3 more times. Every time you remember it, now they're calling you an idiot 1 more time. If someone has hurt you, you can forgive them, but the pain remains with you. And every time you remember it, you're allowing them to hurt you again. And that's what I look at. I said, look, I'm not going to let them hurt me anymore. They've hurt me once, that's it. Because if I keep remembering them and getting angry, they're hurting me every time. And I won't allow them to do that. So that's a little strategy you can use. Whoever it was, whatever they did, I'm not going to allow myself to be hurt. It's gone, it's past. I'm going to be free of that. And that is a motivation for you to, I'll just let it go. And the other time is, sometimes you look upon the past with some kindness and compassion. I don't know why they did that. Why did they say that? Why did they act that way? I can understand it myself, but they had their reasons somewhere. Maybe they're in a bad mood that day. Maybe they're really angry. They got up on the wrong side of the bed. Maybe they didn't really know what they were doing. Find any excuse. Any excuse, even if it's really stretching the limits of possibilities. And that makes it easier to forgive. A person who's a rapist, maybe they were raped in the past. Maybe it's just their conditioning of what they had to go through themselves. So whatever it is, even though it's stretching the truth, go that way, because your job is to forgive. And if anybody wants, well, they're going to get away with this stuff. No one gets away with anything in life. If you're a Christian, God will punish you. If you're a Muslim, Allah will get you. If you're a Buddhist or a Hindu, karma will get you. And if you're an atheist, you don't believe in anything, you'd have to be in psychotherapy for years for what you've done. Whatever, you don't get away with doing bad and hurtful things. So you don't need to be the one who punishes them and makes them suffer. The suffering will come to them automatically, unfortunately. So I always say to my Buddhist friends, no need to seek revenge. Karma will get the bastards anyway. Okay, and I mentioned that word because now you remember it. Okay, another question somewhere. Okay, front here.
I have guilty feeling about myself because I live far away from my mom. She's kind of sick, so if something happened to her, how do I forgive myself?
Okay. Now, first of all, that you've moved over here to what you said you're from? No, but you live here in Prince Edward Island. Yeah, it's a long way, Prince Edward Island to Sri Lanka. But you didn't move to Prince Edward Island to get away from your mum. So your intentions are pure. Now you're doing your very best. So for those of you who are Buddhists, they say, if you do something intentionally, then yes, it's good or bad karma. There's no intention there, there's no blame at all. No blame at all. And your mum will know that. In fact, your mother usually is so happy that her daughter is doing well in life here in Canada, has a husband, good family. That is what will give your mother happiness more than anything else. That's my own mother when I moved all the way to Australia, sorry. She was unhappy that she couldn't be there to see me every day. But she said, it doesn't matter. As long as you are happy wherever you go in life, my son, that'll be my joy. And if you've got kids yourself, have you got kids? Isn't that how you feel? You'd love your kids to be in Prince Edward Island for the rest of their lives, so you can look after them, cook for them. Mothers love cooking for their children. But, if they have to move elsewhere, as long as they're happy and doing well, then mum's happy. So as you would look at your children, that's the way your mother looks at you. So feeling guilty is not a helpful way to look at these things. Is there any questions? There's one in the back there. Yeah, you got one? No. I'll just go a little bit further with forgiveness then while you wait for another question. So far, I've talked about forgiving other people and forgiving yourself. Now the next stage is forgiving life. Do you ever get angry at life? Say, cancer, why me? Death, why do 20-year-olds die? Why is, you work so hard and some stupid government takes all your money away? Why? So often you find we're angry at life instead of learning how to forgive life. And it's a wonderful thing when you look at all the things which happen in our world. You acknowledge them. You don't get angry at the scenes of destruction and poverty and exploitation which you see on the TV and read in the books. You don't get angry. You forgive and learn how to make sure we make it better next time. But sometimes people criticize my thoughts on forgiveness. They say, forgiveness, you can't just forgive. I agree with you. You cannot just forgive. You have to do the next step afterwards. Acknowledge, forgive, and learn so it doesn't happen again. If your partner's committed adultery, it's not just forgive, oh, never mind, darling, and just carry on as normal. No, there's a problem there. Fix the problem, learn, have strategies, something so it never happens again. For that young man who was eating in the afternoon, eat more at lunchtime. There's other things you can do. Make sure you never have that situation of hunger again, so you have to break the rules. Never make yourself in that position again. You feel you have to have sex with another person other than your husband or wife, to get satisfied. Never put yourself in that situation again. You feel that you have to have sex with an underage kid, with a boy. Find a way to solve these problems. Find a way to solve the problems, of extremist views. One of the solutions I proposed, and I keep on saying this because sooner or later it will get around, is a very simple solution is, for goodness sake, ban all religious schools. Because unfortunately what happens, maybe Catholic schools are okay, because I read in a newspaper in, I think, Australia, that 90% of the children who come out of Catholic schools give up Catholicism. I don't know why, but in some schools, though, you are a bit brainwashed. And obviously, if I started a Buddhist school, I'd hope most kids who came out afterwards were Buddhist. And that's really unfair. Muslim schools. Imagine you can go to an Islamic primary school, Islamic secondary school, Islamic university, never meeting anybody else. It's the tribalization of society. If you had secular schools all the way through, it means that Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Jews, atheists, they'd be playing sports together, they'd be the best of friends. They'd hardly ever need to go to war when they understand one another. When you separate people out from childhood, it's a big danger. So it's a very simple solution, but it's quite radical because many vested interests will be challenged. I don't know the politics here in Canada. The government, is that called a liberal government or conservative? What's the opposite, the opposition called? Liberal, Democrat and Conservative. They're the three main parties. Suppose the Conservatives had their own schools and they sent all the children of Conservatives to the Conservative school. Conservative primary school, Conservative secondary school, Conservative universities. Would that be acceptable? Or would you think, you're just brainwashing people into just supporting the Conservative Party? Or the Socialist Party, or the Liberal Party, or the Communist Party. You send your children to the Communist primary school and the Communist secondary school, the Communist universities. wouldn't people complain that this is brainwashing your kids? We do that with religions, though. So, one, there is problems with interreligious, not here in Halifax apparently, because many Christian pastors were here last night, and many sort of apparently Muslims and Christians work together pretty much in peace and harmony here, but not in other places in the world. Especially in my old country, England. There's huge problems there. This is because there are some parts of England which are Muslim, and other people can't go in there. It's been segregated. It's been tribalized. Even in Sri Lanka, Tamils in the north, and Muslims in the south, and Sinhalese in the middle somewhere. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we just all mixed up? You got a big stick and just stirred everybody up, so you didn't know who was who. Same schools, same universities. So that's one way. It's a suggestion. Acknowledging the problem, forgiving any past faults. You never get anywhere with revenge and retribution. And now, learning from the mistakes. There's quite a few Sinhalese here. After the war in Sri Lanka, there's a huge push, I think resisted by the Sri Lankan government, for a human rights investigation about what happened in the war. As a Westerner, I think that's such a negative step. Instead of having a human rights commission, what happened in the war, can we just forgive, let go, if anything, have a truth and reconciliation commission. Find out what really happened, but with no penalties. And then even your president, Rajapaksa, could admit what he did. He won't do that if there's any punishment involved, nor would anybody else. Amnesty, get out the truth from both sides, and then we can learn to make sure it never happens again. There's always a way forward. Those are ways I think we can actually help solve the problems in our world. Big problems. But unfortunately, and as a Buddhist monk, as a Western liberal, progressive, sometimes what the UN does in human rights trials is just seek for revenge. It doesn't really advance human rights. It actually suppresses it. Truth and reconciliation progresses things. Honesty, amnesty, and the reconciliation, learning from the mistakes, and finding ways to move forward. I've just suggested a couple of ways. They may not work. When we consume all our time trying to find out the people who are responsible and punishing them, we're wasting valuable time when we should be finding out the truth, making sure it doesn't happen again. The other thing, is forgiving life, forgiving illness. How many times do we stigmatize illness? Why is it we stigmatize mental health and physical health issues? Why is it we feel guilty about being sick? Guilty about having schizophrenia? Guilty about having depression? Because it gets stigmatized, which is another form of guilt, it means when we do have mild depression, we don't go to the doctor in time to get it fixed. Because we're ashamed of having breast cancer as a woman, or having a mastectomy, that we just stigmatize it, we don't act in time, and which means that it gets much worse. Truth means you're not afraid of truth, because there's no punishment, no stigma, no shame. I'm talking about Sri Lanka here. Some Sri Lankan children are gay. And then I know they're gay, but mum and dad tells me, don't tell anybody Ajahn Brahm, because we'll be ashamed in our community. And that's disgusting. I say, what on earth are you talking about? Are you a real Buddhist? Doesn't your loving kindness, your compassion go to all beings, including gays, lesbians, transgenders. So if your kid is a gay, be proud of it. Tell all your friends. Can you do that? Maybe here in Canada you can. Sometimes in Australia. In Sri Lanka, absolutely not. Because you feel pride, you feel shame. It's another form of guilt. Please don't do that. It's hurting people. So be truthful. Acknowledge and never be ashamed, especially not be ashamed of your own children. Be proud of them. Love them to bits. And say, son, daughter, the door of my heart is open to you no matter who you are, no matter what you ever do. No guilt, no shame. This is not getting angry at life, but forgiving life. It's part of life. And that makes life a much more wonderful place. So, don't be ashamed. Don't forgive if you've got schizophrenia or depression. It sometimes happens to people. It's not your fault. You know, I told this, I think, in Montreal. One day, and I've been a monk for a long time, teaching a lot of people, and teaching people about meditation, good for your health. Right attitude, good for your health. Laughing, good for your health. And going around teaching all these people about the benefits, the health benefits of meditation and a good attitude. But one day I got sick. And I went to the local doctor's surgery. And I was sitting, waiting for my appointment. One of my friends came in. And they looked at me and they were surprised. Ajahn Brahm, I never expected to see you in here. And I started to feel guilty about being sick. You're not supposed to be sick, Ajahn Brahm. You tell us to meditate, to do the right things, to be healthy, and now you're sick, you big hypocrite. And for one moment, I felt so guilty being sick. And thought, stop it, Ajahn Brahm, forgive yourself. So I allowed myself to be sick. And I told everybody, I flaunted it. And that's part of forgiveness. Don't feel guilty and upset. Don't hide the truth. Enjoy it. So please forgive life. Be truthful to life. Acknowledge it. And once you've done that, then you learn from life. You don't hide it. You don't suppress things. I've got a gay son. What should I do about that? Learn from it. You learn a lot about the gay community. I still think I wasn't gay, I was straight. I had girlfriends, not boyfriends. But when I became a monk, you had to open your heart up to everybody. And you open your heart up to the gay and lesbian community. One of my proudest moments in my monk life, one of my proudest moments I like to tell everybody, was when I scored an invitation to the gay and lesbian Mardi Gras breakfast. I was very proud of that. Even more proud of, I was saying earlier on, getting an invitation to the state dinner with Queen Elizabeth. I think that's about number 2. But getting an invitation to the gay and lesbian and transgender Mardi Gras breakfast, that was way up there, number 1. Because I felt, wow, that's wonderful. I've been supporting this community, even though I'm not a part of them. I can support them when a lot of other people are just so critical. And it causes so much pain to these, your sons, your daughters, your brothers and sisters, your friends, who are gay. Canada's great these days, but still in some parts of Canadian society, there's still stigma. And when I went to that breakfast, I had to give a speech, and I told people, the gay and lesbians and transgenders, I said, you think that you are weird. You think that you are sexually deviant. I, Ajahn Brahm, am more sexually deviant than all of you. I am celibate. I see this in some newspapers and some commentators. They say, okay, straight sex is okay, gay and lesbian sex is okay, but being celibate, that is unnatural. I've heard that say, that being celibate is unnatural. Exactly what they said to the gays and lesbians maybe 10 years ago, unnatural. And now I'm in the firing line. for being celibate. It's unnatural. It is natural, and I'm having a great time being celibate. So if there is another gay and lesbian Mardi Gras and I have the time, I'm going to have my own float. Celibate rights. Respect for celibacy. It's a choice, and you can make it. It's not unnatural. If you want it, why? Why not? Free society. Celibate rights. Celebrate celibacy. Okay, anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Any other comments or questions about forgiveness? Go on.
Thank you very much, Bhante, for your wonderful and hysterically funny teachings. I don't know if you're familiar with the Halifax Shambhala Buddhist community. Halifax is the international center for the Shambhala Buddhist community. Yeah. And it's hard to say this out loud, but there's a real schism in our community. And when you were discussing conflict brought about by religions, I thought I would ask you if you have any advice for how the leadership might deal with the schism that has arisen between older students of the founder of Shambhala and the current students of his son. I'm a mere minion in the church, and those of us who aren't in leadership positions are always, who haven't taken a side, feel tremendous pain about this situation, as do those on either side, but it seems necessary that there be forgiveness, mediation, I'm not really sure what, and I wonder if you have any advice that you might offer.
Okay. There is the Buddha, the leader of all our traditions, if you're a Buddhist. He gave this one other possibility of resolution in such disputes, and he called it the covering over with grass. It's traditional from the time of the Buddha. So we have a dispute, a schism, and when there's a schism, we all say things we shouldn't have said and we feel sorry about. I shouldn't have said that to these people. There's obviously a reason why we said these things, and we said hurtful things, did stupid things. And instead of seeking retribution, seeking apologies, you ask forgiveness. No, you ask forgiveness first. No, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. Just like little kids in the playground. Instead, we have this beautiful ceremony of covering over with grass. We meet together and we say just whatever we did, and we all do bad things from time to time, and we don't need to be embarrassed or guilty about it. It's just human nature. We say things, unless you're perfectly enlightened, like a Buddha, you will say bad things, do hurtful things. It's nature, okay? Be honest to yourself. And we meet together, and we do a little ceremony, in your own words. Whatever this side said or did, we're sorry. Please forgive us. Let's cover it over with grass. And the other one says the same. And just, in one step, all of that stuff, the whole mass of it, which is impossible to resolve in any other way, is like buried under the soil. And grass grows on top of it, and it vanishes and disappears forever, covering over with grass. So that gets rid of all the bad actions and the bad speech and the conflict which we've had before. Once that is gone, we have no ill will towards one another. Then we can figure out what the problem is. Succession, this teacher, that teacher. How can we resolve that? But whenever there's anger and there's bad feelings, what's done and said in the past, we can't even address that part of the problem. And when we address the part of the problem with kindness, with mutual respect, there is always a solution we can have. One of those solutions comes from what I said just to a couple just after my talk last night. It's whenever I do marriage ceremonies, looking in the eyes of the wife first of all and say, now, from this day on, you're married. You must never think of yourself. She nods. Look at the husband. From this day on, you're married. You must never think of yourself. He nods. Still looking at the husband. Now you're married. From this day on, you must never think of your wife. And looking at the husband. So look at the wife. From this day on, you must never think of your husband. And it's a wonderful moment after I said that. Because just like some of you, you wonder, what the heck does this mean? This is crazy stuff. And with their minds open, wondering what the solution to this riddle is, I give them that solution. From this time on, you must never think of yourself, nor must you think of your partner. You must only think of us. That third option, you're in a marriage. It's about us, not about him, not about her, not about me, it's about us. So that is one of the solutions to a schism. It's not about the left side of the schism. It's not about the right side of the schism. It's not about my side of the schism. It's about us. It's our problem. And when it's our problem, when we fix it together, there's a solution. When you blame the other side, when you blame yourself, there's no possibility of solution. It's our problem. So you fix it. And in the end, your allegiance should never be to a teacher. It should be to the Dhamma, to the Buddha. Your first, basically, the one which right in front of you is your teacher. But bigger than that, the big teacher, the big boss, is the Buddha and the Dhamma. That trumps everybody else. You know the three refuges in Buddhism? Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. It's never Buddha, Dhamma, and Ajahn Brahm. Don't do that. It's Buddha, Dhamma, and the great Sangha, the community. The Dhamma and the Buddha. And that is bigger than any teacher, any guru. When you remember that, there's a solution. So that maybe some possibilities? Yeah, come back.
Thank you, yes, very helpful.
Very good. But don't worry about schisms. It always happens. Don't be guilty about it. It's part of the course. If you treat it properly, you learn so much and you grow so much. What I was saying yesterday, a big bunch of shit for the Shambhala community. Dig it under the apple trees and you will grow even more powerful than ever before.
I was here last night, so I heard that story,
Yeah,
so
great,
I know
yeah.
what you're talking about.
Yeah, so you're in the shit. Dig it in.